but more about that later. I mean, I'm here to talk about the book of Frankl. So first off, what I just thought of mentioning is that it is a book that is obviously written by the author about himself. I mean, the author is writing about his own life, you know. So Frankl wrote about 39, 40 books throughout his career. And this is the one that is best known. Let me I'm just gonna share a screen here. So Man's Search for Meaning is the one that we all know. So it's a tiny little book. It's 100 pages. There's another 57 pages that the second part of the book is more about the philosophy itself. But the book, in essence, his story is only 100 pages. He wrote it in 9 days after coming out of the camps in 1946. And to date, it sold, 12 million plus copies. I think in the early 90s, it got voted as one of the top 10 most influential books in the United States. So for me, this thing is like an operating manual for life. And there's first of all, I just want to mention two things. You cannot take the philosopher out of his philosophy. So reading Frankl's book, one must understand where he comes from. So let me just explain his life a little bit before we actually get into the book and the philosophy. So Frankl he was born in Vienna in 1905, in March 1905. Family, he was the middle child. And from a very early age, he was interested in what is the meaning of life. There's a story that even at the age of 6, he had this question about death and what is the meaning of death and what does death mean for life. And he had arguments with teachers, science teachers, that we are not just carbon. We are much more than just a bunch of stuff. At the age of 16, one of his first papers got published. He had conversations with Freud. He was a student of Freud. They corresponded while Frankl was still in junior school. He was a student of Adler, but he saw things differently, and he broke away from both of those, and eventually logotherapy got coined, the third school of Viennese psychiatry. So Frankl, after school, he went to study, study medicine, became a neurologist, qualified. He worked in what is called the suicide pavilion of the Viennese polyclinic. So he had, up to a stage, there was like 12,000 suicide patients that was not under his care at the same time, but came through his ward and through his care and his team. So for me, what is important to understand is that this is not some guy who went into the woods and had an epiphany and wrote a book, and now this is the best thing out there. This is somebody who started thinking about these things from the age of 6, who wrote papers, who was used to debating, who was used to analyzing, who practiced it. He was 37 when he went to the concentration camp. So now you must understand, there's a guy, he's a qualified doctor, he's a neurologist, he runs a division of the hospital with thousands of patients, and he gets sent, he gets married to Tilly. She's pregnant, they had to abort the child. He gets sent to the concentration camps at the age of 37, and everything is stripped from him. And he walks in there as a number. So just first off, we are not dealing here with a matter of opinion. We are not dealing here with somebody who has done robust research and questionnaires and stuff like that. We are dealing here with somebody who lived it, who survived the story and can tell us how he did it. So that is just the context. So for some people, he may be seen as very authoritarian, because one of his basic things is you must get off your hands, don't sit on your bum, go out there and make it happen. Nobody's going to do it for you. You need to do it. It's your responsibility. So his attitude is very much, you need to take responsibility for your life and don't think anybody else is going to do it for you. So there are some very strong undertones. So as much as this sits in the space of existentialism and you know, there is quotes of positive psychology and it's all good and all those things. There is something very harsh and very robust about Frankl's work. So let me just go back to the concentration camps. So there was this time where he had to decide whether he's going to immigrate to America. He got given a visa to go to the States and to go and lecture and work at one of the universities. But he tells the story where he was walking in Vienna and picked up a fragment from a synagogue that got destroyed. And on this fragment was a part of the Torah that said something, honor your father and your mother. And he took this as a sign, and I'm getting gooseflesh as I'm sitting here telling you this. He took this as a sign to say, no, you're not leaving, you're staying, you got to stay. He had a sense of calling. So, and that was fundamental. You know, that was absolutely a fundamental turning point, because a couple of months later, they were off to the concentration camps. He got split up. His wife, his brother, his parents, they all died. He didn't know that, but they all died in the camps. He was in 4 camps over a 3-year period. He tells us one story that you will see if you read the book, where he got off a train. They were on a train. They're now going into the camps, and they had to get in a line. And he had the manuscript of what is today called The Doctor and the Soul, which is a more serious book. Frankl's writings is sometimes very hard to read. Some of it is unplayable. It is really, really technically, I mean, listen to this. So he's got this wording. He will say, your pre-reflective ontological self-understanding is something that you need to call upon, your pre-reflective ontological self-understanding. So that is, I don't know what that means. You know, it took me a while to figure out. It means the wisdom of the heart. But Frankl didn't write, he wrote, he was a scientist, and he wrote for the scientific communities, which is possibly why, you know, logotherapy as a body is not nearly as popular in the general press as positive psychology. And Martin Seligman does some amazing work with positive psychology. It's very useful. No disrespect to that. But that is why logotherapy is maybe a bit of a smaller philosophy, I can call it that way. It's never actually been popularized. So I want to tell you a story. They got off the train, and he says they're in a line, and there's a commander standing, a Nazi, and he's doing this with his finger. He's pointing people to the left and to the right, and to the left and to the right, and they don't know what that is about. And he's walking in this line, and he decided he's not going to leave his luggage in the train as he was ordered. He's got this bag over his shoulder, and he's in his bag and in his coat, he's got the beginnings of the manuscript for The Doctor and the Soul. And as they get closer to the line, he tells a story. Somebody says, they're pointing, if you go to the left, you are going to the gas chambers. And if you go to the right, you go to the working camps, meaning you'll be spared. So he says how he straightens himself and walk up to this man, hoping, obviously, that he's going to get the finger to the right. So, I mean, imagine you're a 37-year-old neurologist going through that. He got clearly sent to the right, and he went on and his book, the 100 pages tells you his story, but he doesn't write from a heroic point. He doesn't try to make himself a martyr. He is telling you the story of the small people. I call it the people that would usually have fallen between the cracks, the small people, how they survived, and what was the psychology of somebody surviving a concentration camp ordeal. So, in essence, Frankl is saying to us that it is possible to discover meaning in life despite your circumstances. So there is a huge defiancy written in that statement. He is basically saying, no matter your biological background, no matter your psychological background, no matter your sociological or socioeconomic background, each of us has the power to defy fate and stand up for the freedom that we feel we need to express. And I'll unpack some of this as we go along. So I think I've covered this. He died in late 97. He came to South Africa once. He did a lecture at UNISA, I think somewhere in the 80s. I'm not quite sure. Some of the members on the team may have actually attended that. I know some people, you know, I've met a couple of people who attended that lecture. So let's get into his philosophy a little bit. So basically, it's built on 3 pillars. It's called the will to meaning, the meaning of life, and the freedom of will. And I'll just explain it a little bit. So the will to meaning, what he's saying is that our will to be useful, to discover something that is significant, and to experience meaning is more powerful and a stronger motivation for life than power or pleasure. So different from, now look, he is respectful and grew up with Freud, and I know nothing of Freud, but the pleasure principle that we are a bundle of, we are driven by repressed anxieties and emotions. Frankl had another take on this. He would say that whereas classical psychotherapy hopes to bring to our awareness our repressed drives and anxieties, logotherapy makes us aware of our spiritual realities. So it is a forward-looking, forward-moving. It was referred to as height psychology, because it does not dwell in the basement. It is not that it doesn't deny it, not at all, but it is saying that the power lies in expressing a will to meaning. So meaning is and that is more powerful than pleasure. We all need pleasure. We all want power, but power like money and business and recognition and strong reputations and powerful jobs and beautiful homes and beautiful cars and pleasure and lekker holidays, all of those things are useful. It's not, I mean, of course we want it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that is, some of it is a result of something that you've done, but some of that is a means to an end, because, and the end is to strive for meaning. Because also he also speaks about Maslow's work, and that self-actualization is not what it's about. I mean, it is like chasing the rainbow. He says that to chase self-actualization it can be the same as chasing the rainbow. It is a result. Self-actualization comes as a result of having pursued meaning and of having transcended oneself. So the will to meaning is the first principle that he says is our primary driver. The second one, the meaning of life, is, you know, he postulates that there must be meaning in life because we all have experienced it. And, you know, from a scientific point, we as Westerners, we want to see results. We want to see stuff in labs, and we want to test things and then write reports, and we test things in laboratories, then we believe it. You know, that's how we wired, that's how we grow up, that's how we think, that's how we are taught logic works. But if you think of the meaning of life, and use yourself as an experiment. I mean, that is ultimately, and later when I maybe refer to the Tibetans, how you are also a research project. So the meaning of life and the extent to which you can look in your own life, what makes you feel good, what really makes you feel good, and how a second handbag and another pair of shoes doesn't quite do it. It's never enough. Pleasure and power, it's never quite enough. That the meaning of life is what truly drives us. And now explaining what is the meaning of life. Now this is many books, and I can't give you the definitive question, and there's people far more eloquent and clever that can give you much better definitions. But Frankl says we must look at meaning in life in 3 ways. Firstly, he says there's the ultimate meaning of life, which is the space of the religiosity and the afterlife, and it is something that ultimately we may never be able to understand. So the ultimate meaning of life and the ultimate questions is something that we can recognize, but we will never be able to understand it. You know, the Tibetans have got a beautiful quote. They say, if you get somebody shoots you with an arrow, are you going to ask, who shot me? Why did he shoot me? Where did the arrow come from? How long did the arrow travel? You know, what is the arrow made of? Or are you going to say, get this arrow out of here. I need to get fixed. I need to deal with this now. So this ultimate meaning sits a little bit in that space. So for us to debate and argue of where do we come, is the Big Bang true? Is it not true? To argue about those things, we can do that. But ultimately, there is something about that we will never quite understand. Second level of meaning is the meaning of my life. Okay, so the meaning of my life, I can get to grips with a little bit better. And he uses a movie as an analogy. So when we consider what is the meaning of my life, we might think of our lives. We love, sometimes it's useful to think in metaphor. To think of my life as a movie. And this whole movie has got scenes, and it's got a past, and it flows, and we don't know where it's going to end, but we can script it, and we will not know the meaning of this life or the meaning of this movie, if it's a good movie, right up to the end. So in a way, the meaning of my life is something that I can get to grips with a little bit better and a little bit more, and can look at and analyze and add and work with. So there's then the meaning of my life is the one dimension that he says we must consider. But the most powerful one is the meaning of the moment, which is and Frankl will say that the meaning is buried in the granaries of life. Now, he's got a concept, he calls it the transitoriness of life. And if you can picture an hourglass, and in the hourglass, the top half of the hourglass is the future, and the bottom is the past, and where the hourglass narrow is now. So now, we've all heard we must live in the now, and, we must live now, and blah, blah, blah. The thing is, now is not actually a time. I mean, if you think of time, now, this moment, me talking to you guys now on the Zoom talk, is the only reality that really exists. The future and the past is a concept. It's a thought. I can't show it to you. I can't show it to anybody. I can't show the future, Frankl says, is a potentiality. And we must understand that it's only ever a potentiality. It doesn't exist. But most of our anxieties sits in the future, and most of our fears sits and regrets and guilt sits in the past. But all of those things are mental constructs. It doesn't really exist. We all know that. So the meaning of life needs to be seen in those three dimensions, and I will later on come to what he calls the avenues to meaning. So, how do I find this? So just as a side note, what makes Frankl's work interesting for me is it is not only a philosophy that somebody wrote who really, really experienced it. So there's not, you cannot get a better scientific experiment than this. So it's not only a robust philosophy, it is also a therapy. So often you have a philosophy that doesn't quite translate into a therapy. And later when we talk about the work of Elizabeth Lucas, it's therapists that has done, amazing work and are using this as a full-on therapy. But now, before people think, I am biased, but this is not a one-size-fits-all. I'm not saying that logotherapy is the therapy or the solution for everything. It isn't. But it's very useful. So the three pillars: will to meaning, meaning of life, and then freedom of will. So the freedom of will, what he's saying here is that we have the will to express ourselves that cannot be contained, and that it is free. He often quotes people like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard said that anxiety, what does he say? Anxiety is the price of freedom. Something like that. Anxiety is the price of freedom. What he is hinting at is like a kid in a candy shop. I don't know what to choose. But the freedom of will is the third principle that his philosophy is built on. Aniki, are we okay so far?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. So let me just go on. Let me just unpack a couple of his concepts a little bit more. So let's come to the avenues to meaning. So Frankl will say that meaning is not something that can be prescribed to anybody. Nobody can. It's not something that anybody can prescribe. I can only repeat that. It is something that at best a therapist can describe, but every one of us must find meaning and discover meaning for ourselves in our unique way. So it's up to us. But he says, he helps us, and he says the three places you can go and look to experience meaning is what he says, your creative act is what you do. It's what you do for somebody else. It's the way you So in the business world, it's when you write your report for your team members, the way you do that, it's a cup of tea that you make for somebody when they wake up. It's the door that you open for somebody getting into a car. We're not talking about Mother Teresa things here. It can be those big, huge things. But your creative acts in what you do, because meaning, he says, it's like a boomerang. If it comes back to you, it hasn't hit the mark. It is so if you, and he also refers to this obsessive self-concern there, but unless you do something for somebody other than yourself, you're going to miss the mark. You're going to miss the point. So the creative act, he says, is doing something obviously useful, beneficial, that for something or some person other than yourself. The second avenue is what he called experiential. This is now typically, listening to a great piece of music, watching a great movie and feeling good afterwards, watching the sunset with a glass of wine with your friends. It is something that you receive that makes you feel this is meaningful. I'm feeling good. It is, I've got, some of we all have some of those if we think. So in a way, as we go through this, you will recognize in your own way, in your own life, what these things look like to you. The third one is what he called attitudinal values. So the attitudinal values is probably the strongest one. So he would say, I'm just muting somebody here, Aniki. So in terms of the attitudinal values, what he points out there is that we have, as humans, we have the ability to defy the odds and stand for what is right and what we believe in. So we can defiantly say no. And typically, this applies to people with what is called unavoidable suffering. So you can get somebody who's lost their legs, received cancer, and they have to deal with it. And everybody deals it with your own way. And I'm not here prescriptive here, and I don't mean to criticize. I'm here to show what is possible. What Frankl has shown us is that it is possible for somebody in the worst of worst conditions to stand up and say, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to behave like that, because that is according to my moral guidance. And in the attitude of adopting that stance, that person will experience a sense of meaning and I'm doing my thing and fulfillment. We don't have time to talk about meaning and happiness. There is a difference between meaning and happiness. So when we talk about meaning and when we talk about Frankl, he is not saying it's good to suffer. Of course not. I mean, suffering is, nobody wants to suffer. He's not saying it's good to suffer, not at all. What he is saying is that despite suffering, we are able to feel meaning and to not experience pleasure, because I mean, you can't expect somebody in a concentration camp to experience pleasure, but they can get through it for meaning. And humor is a big part of his therapy as well. So humor is very much part of this mix. So the three avenues. Let me just touch on neurodynamics. So in terms of our ontology, how we made up. So he says a human, what distinguishes us from animals is the fact that we have consciousness. We have a noetic domain, body, psyche, or a somatic dimension, a psychic dimension, psychological dimension, and a noetic dimension. And the noetic dimension, sorry, this clock, Aniki, is going to strike. I forgot to take it out. It's going to strike 4 times, almost done. So in the noetic dimension is what makes us truly human. So what he's saying is, in our mind, the mind is the place for emotions and perceptions and feelings but in the noetic domain is the space of creativity and a sense for what is good and a sense for what is right, and more importantly, consciousness. So we're talking about concepts here. So how do I show, I can't show consciousness to you, but he uses the term, he says consciousness is like a meaning-centered organ. It's like our meaning-finding organ. So consciousness is what I said earlier, that pre-reflective ontological self-understanding, it's that knowing, where you just know. It's like the gut feel is maybe the voice that connects you to consciousness, but in our hearts of hearts, we know what is the right thing to do. The Eastern people have got a saying about the mind. They say the mind is like a drunken monkey stung by a scorpion. Very clever. Our minds can convince ourselves of the most amazing things. But our consciousness, our conscience in our noetic domain is where the true answers and the true guidance for us lie. But now he says, and Elizabeth Lucas coins the phrase, there's a tension, a noetic psychic tension between the noetic dimension and the psychic dimension. And we are forever in tension. Frankl goes as far as saying that we are not built for homeostasis. Maybe in our body, yeah, we need food and we need air, you know, so yeah, there's balance in the body. We want balance. And in our mind, we want some balance, but in our consciousness, we are not built for balance. He says we will die of psychic rigor mortis if we do not have a little niggling to say, hey, you know what, this is not working for me. And frustration is not always a bad thing. Frustration is the restlessness of the heart that says, get a move on. This is not good enough. This is not working for you. So frustration is not a bad thing. It gets bad if we ignore it and we do nothing about it. And what he's saying in terms of his neurotic triad, that if we do not listen to the voice of the heart, if we do not listen to our noetic impulses, we run the risk of falling into the trap of depression, aggression, and addiction. So somewhere, and I'm not, it's easy for me to talk, but depression, aggression, addiction somewhere has got to do with somebody not being able to express and give outing to their spiritual realities that they have. I'm moving on to transcendency. This is also what makes us human. Our transcendency has got two aspects to it. So transcendency, firstly, as a human being, we can transcend ourselves. We can get over ourselves. I mean, he speaks of psychological striptease. So you know, when I hear the term, I want to go and find myself, that for me, that is psychological striptease. It's like, what do you want to do when you find yourself, what then? The point, what he's saying is we need to transcend. We are able to get over ourselves, but the whole idea is to get better. If somebody has to ask me, what is the meaning of life in one sentence, then it is this thing: get better at being a human being. That is the meaning of that will give meaning to your life. That is it. I mean, there was a time I take people to India, to the Tibetan community, and we go up into the mountains, and there's this the hermit monks. There's this hermit monk, and we get an audience. I can't speak English, so I've got a Tibetan translator. And now we sit with this monk. He's been in hermitage for 30 years, meditating like, every day, hours and hours. And he's like this hermit monk. It's like this mystical moment. So the first time, now we've seen him a couple of times, but the first time, so when I was just talking, and I say to him, I asked the translator, what is the meaning of life? So he looks at me and the answer comes back, I don't know. So I said, oh, okay. So I said, what is the meaning of your life? And then he said to me, to make the world a better place. So when we think of meaning, often we run the risk of thinking it is this huge thing that we need to achieve and we must all become Mother Teresa's. And Frankl and the Tibetans, I say, just make the world a better place, little by little. Just do the right thing. Just make the world a better place. Okay, so I've spoken about the existential vacuum. So this existential vacuum, if we don't pay attention to it, we may run the risk of running into depression, addiction, and aggression, transcendency, and then responsibility. So, you are a book club or a book, we're doing a book review here. And there's a story about Hemingway who got asked to, I think he got challenged to write a short story. I don't know if some of you will know this. And he wrote a short story with 6 words. So I'm going to read you the story. But so don't want to stretch it out. But the Hemingway, short story with 6 words. Now, look for the gift of a writer to create drama, suspense, sadness, the whole emotional gambit in the following short story. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. You know, I mean, to write, how does somebody write that? I mean, that is why Hemingway is Hemingway. But now, the reason I'm bringing that up, so there was this Jewish mystic called Hillel. So Hillel, Frankl quotes Hillel often. So, this is a thing on religion. So Frankl was a religious Jewish person, but his work is secular. So he says clearly many times, whether you're religious or not there's not issue. Religion is a personal thing. And this philosophy applies to the religious and the non-religious person alike. It doesn't matter. It is secular. It stands beyond. And Elizabeth Lucas goes as far as saying that we mustn't confuse spirituality with religion. She says that religion is something you get born into, and spirituality is something you are born with. So the Tibetans will say, you don't need religion to be a good person. There are people who are very good people without being religious, and so just to put religion there. So Hillel, he quotes Hillel often. So Hillel was a Jewish mystic, as I said. So Hillel has this quote: "If I don't do it, when am I going to do it? If I don't do it now, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Sorry, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? If I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And if I do it for myself, then who am I?" And with those 21 words, he is saying, I need to do it. I need to do it now. And I need to do it for something more than myself. Because if I just do it for myself, then what is it for? You know, it's not enough. So that sort of, in a way, sums up this one of the key concepts of responsibility. So let me just move on. There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to, we offer this. This is offered as a 4-year program or 4-module program through the Viktor Frankl Institute and UNISA, and so obviously in the program you get taught the philosophy, and then you get skilled in applying the tools. And I'm not going to go deeply into this. We don't have time for that, but I just want to give you a feel for it, just so you can feel the language and the narrative of this therapy. So there's a thing called dereflection. So dereflection is the ability to change the way you look. Think of it that way. Think of it, you get to a stop street and you get turned into a different direction. And dereflection is a useful tool to deal with a situation where somebody is hyper-intensive or hyper-reflecting. So a neurotic hyper-reflecting on me, and my problems and my trouble and my self-obsessed nature. You know, Aniki, I can say this because I'm speaking now for myself. But what this work has done for me is to make me aware of how desperately sad my own self-concerns are, how pathetically sad they are. If I look at around what's going on around the world, and if I look at potential and ability, and I wake up in the morning and I worry about this and I worry about that, and it's like, really? And you know, the head of the program, Dr. Teria Chantal, she's the lady who founded the program in South Africa, and she's met Frankl and worked with Frankl and studied with him, and she's on the international committee. She's got this beautiful way of when somebody is, we do a session, a therapy session, and she's like, the person is complaining about all the issues, and she will say blah 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 blah. Who is inside there? Because that is what, because logotherapy is a therapy to get the human power out, and to get that person to stand up, and as Frankl and Elizabeth Lucas will say, to stand on top of fate. Because you know, the balance between fate and freedom, we get dealt a set of cards and we accept it as, this is my story, this is my fate. And yeah, maybe it is. But there is another side. There is the freedom to say, well, no. This is not good enough. I'm going to challenge this. Let me give you an example. There's the story of a young girl who she was in the concentration camps, and she had to take all her clothes off in front of the panel, the Nazi panel. And the story goes, she stood there, but she looked unfussed and she looked unaffected by this. So the question was, so why, and I'm paraphrasing broadly here, but how come you're not worried or scared or, you know, not crumbling? I mean, I'm making up these words a little bit, but the story is, she said, you can take everything away from me. You can take whatever you want, but you cannot take my dignity. So I'm not saying it's easy. Frankl doesn't tell us it's easy. He's saying it's possible. So dereflection is a technique that is used to dereflect somebody from their hyper-intensive, like picture a tennis player, so focused on the grip that he fluffs the ball, so hyper-intense. We hold something so hard and so heavy that it becomes heavy. So dereflection, self-distancing, and another one, the ability to look at oneself. So these are not, I'm not applying the tools. I'm just showing you some of the key tools. Attitude modulation. Elizabeth Lucas was great in practicing this. So behavior is not the problem. Behavior will look after itself if the attitude is right. So the extent to which attitudes are modulated, and the way to modulate an attitude is from the premise of meaning. Because Nietzsche, when he said, if you have a strong enough why, you will overcome any how. So Simon Sinek he calls himself the why guy, and Simon is a great, I wish I can speak and do his kind of work, but he wasn't the first why guy. I mean, Nietzsche was the first why guy, and maybe Socrates was before him the why guy. So if you have a strong enough why, you will walk through a brick wall. You'll walk over broken glass if you know why you are doing it. Socratic dialogue, obviously. So the Socratic dialogue is used, you know, by many therapies and places, and this ambiguous, you know, way of Socrates of, discussing, seemingly not knowing the answer. And paradoxical intention. So a paradoxical intention is where you intend the opposite of what the anxiety is, and humor comes in here. So Frankl will say that humor has the ability to take the wind out of the sails of anxiety. If we can laugh at something, it immediately becomes lighter. So just a quick touch on that. So I'm not going to, I see we're running out of time a little bit. So I'm just going to quickly go through this, just as I say, just to give you a feel for the narrative. So if you look on the left, the witnessing mind, so this could be, this is your conscience. So your conscience, what it says is that we have symptoms. We are not our symptoms. We have fear. I have anxiety. I have uncertainty. I have jealousy. I have a feeling I don't have enough. I am not that. I have it as a feeling. So to create distance. In this way, to become conscious of unconscious thoughts, not the unconscious, the ids and the drives, as in the case of Freud, but opinions that we are not aware of, to bring to our reality, to bring to our awareness our spiritual realities, and to ultimately unlock the defined power of the human spirit, because we have a defined power. I mean, when I take the people, when we go to the Tibetan community, there's a thing called self-immolation. So if you Google Tibetan self-immolation, you will see Tibetans burning themselves to death. They burn themselves to death to try and draw attention to what is happening in Tibet. China occupied Tibet in 1959, finally, and they have killed more than 1 million people. They've destroyed thousands of monasteries. The Dalai Lama and 80,000 people escaped in 59. So the issue of Tibet and the oppression and the cultural genocides that's happening in Tibet, but nobody knows about it. Nobody talks about it because it's China. So there are people that self-immolate. Can you imagine? You put yourself on fire, hoping that somebody will capture this on a smartphone and put it out in the world, and it gets into social media so that people can hear what is going on. So we are not like that. But the people doing that are normal people. But they believe in something so strongly that is the end, that is where they will go to. So what that is showing us that we have the power. I mean, nobody wants that, but so what logotherapy is telling us, that we have that if we know why and if it's connected with meaning. Moving on to the right, the thought. Now this is where attitudinal modulation can happen, where we can truly question our self-limiting beliefs and find humor. So just in terms of internal growth, just starting with self-detachment, so we are able to self-detach and de-reflect to allow for objective, realistic, critical perception. Frankl, there was this story where one of his compatriots was not ridiculing him, but saying, this logotherapy of you, what is that typically? How does it work? So he was talking to a psychotherapist, apparently, and Frankl said to him, so you tell me first, what is psychotherapy? So the guy said something like, well, psychotherapy is where somebody lies on a couch and they have to become aware of some unpleasant things in their past. And Frankl said something to the effect of, well, in logotherapy, the patient sits upright and may have to hear some things that is very uncomfortable to hear about him in this life. So there's a part of this that there's objective, realistic, critical perceptions can only happen if we get a little bit away from our obsessive self-concerns. And logotherapy can do this. And this is to counter hyper-reflection and hyper-intention, to actually answer to the call of life and figure out because he will say, we all want things from life, all of us. We wake up in the morning and say, oh, I hope I want this to happen. I want that to happen. I want more of this. I want less of that. I want a little bit. We all want, every day we want things to go our way. What he's saying is sometimes we need to stop and say, what is life asking from you? Because he would refer to life as a taskmaster. And we are in relationship with this taskmaster. And sometimes life is asking us stuff and we need to answer. So moving around to reorientate towards meaning, and then, okay, I've covered some of that. So let me just spend some time on some of the other authors. So we spoke about Edith Eger. So her book, The Choice, is also very, very good to read. I mean, she was a young girl when she went to the camps. And she regards Frankl as one of her two saviors, because she got pulled out of a heap literally by a GI at the end of the war. And Frankl, who sort of gave her permission to let go and to carry on and to live her life and to be an example. So Edith Eger's book, it's written by a woman, so obviously that may be interesting. The second person, Thierry Chantal. So Dr. Chantal is the head of the program in South Africa. She's the founder. She's based in Israel. She comes from Pretoria, and she's just released a new book. So she also has got also wrote a couple of books. So she's also very, I can also recommend that. For me, Joseph Fabry he's a compatriot of Frankl, but Joseph Fabry's books are easier to read. None of these are going to, I mean, you can get them all on Amazon. Some of them may be out of print, but if you just Google on Amazon, you'll find them all. So Joseph Fabry is also a very, very, if you want to understand the philosophy and get into the application. Elizabeth Lucas, for me, is probably one of the top therapists. She's written many books. She also, met Frankl, worked with him, studied with him, understand, one of his kind of people. And I can really recommend. She's a therapist, and she applies this. And her, case studies in her books. If there's the psychologist on the group who wants to understand this a bit deeper, I can recommend Elizabeth's work. Paul Wong, I think he's in the States. He's also a very good, Google him. He's got an amazing website with amazing content that he puts out. And then Alex Patakos, who wrote Prisoners of Our Mind, or Prisoners of Our Thoughts, yeah. He's a Greek guy, also met Frankl, and also somebody that I can recommend. So, Haniki, can I change tack a little bit? I want to show you a video. So let me just say this. So I came into logotherapy. I left advertising after 25 years, went into the coaching space, didn't quite work for me, and got into logotherapy. So what I now do is I take people on short experiential journeys to India, because for me, I like the outdoors, I like adventures, I like unusual experiences. And my business is called Street School, because the streets is where you learn, for me. And this is not the best way, but that's my way, or the way I like. So I do these trips where I take people, I work with the Tibetans directly, with the Tibetan community. So we work with the Office of the Dalai Lama. We've met him about 10 times. I've done 32 trips in the last 8 or 9 years. And I also do treks to Everest Base Camp. So when we go to base camp, I would say to people, if you think the trek to base camp is what it's about, you're missing something. But you will see when we get to the Himalayas, because there is not a place that confronts you in a good way, on a physical, a psychological, and a spiritual way like the Himalayas. You are in this, it's like being in the womb of something very confrontational. It is a very, and we, in 2016, we took a group of women who survived breast cancer with the BHF in Joburg for them to become brand ambassadors of what is possible despite having had cancer. So I do these journeys, and I just want to play this clip for you to. If you can hear, just put your hand up. I'm going to play it if the sound is playing correctly.
We got to Dharamsala and I instantly felt so blessed. Everything that I've learned and being in the Tibetan culture has talked about happiness versus contentment.
I think like before the trip, I was aware of the situation that was going about in Tibet, but I wasn't really aware of like the extremity of it. So I think I've grown in that way where I've become more aware.
It is something so different to be. I realized for the first time how appreciative I was. I grew. And because I've grown, I can go back.
I think definitely when I go back, I'm going to try and implement everything I've learned.
And I will not ever in my life be the same person that I was when I left.
And it's also made me appreciate what I have even more.
The emotion that I felt was one of comprehension.
The way we've been taught to, I think we've been taught to look at life in a different sense.
And we both needed to come to mature. And mature not as friends, but as women.
It really opened my eyes to like all the mistakes, all the things that I haven't been really doing.
There's still things that I don't accept about myself. There's still many things that I struggle to deal with. But I have begun that journey and I've begun that path. And I will never be the same again.
So those are sort of 16-year-old girls. I've just got another one I want to show you, the young boys. You can see this, Aniki?
Yep.
How's it, guys? My name is Shane Basson, and I'm currently a student at the University of Pretoria. And in 2015, I was privileged and lucky enough to be given the chance to go to Dharamsala to visit the Tibetan monks and experience their life. And it honestly was one of the best experiences of my whole entire life. It was completely, it changed my life, I would say. At the time, I was in a very dark space personally, and I was angry at a few things. And going on the trip and being exposed to the Tibetan way of living and the Tibetan philosophies and just their mindset was completely eye-opening. And it brought me out of this anger and this darkness, and it brought me into a place of light and of hope, and is just what makes the whole trip unique and something that you're not going to find anywhere else. You can't go on another program that is going to give you the exact same things that street school gives you.
Not often in life do you find something that changes your very outlook on life, that changes your very core values that you live throughout your life. Not often do you find something that will remain with you until the day you die. This is what my trip to Dharamsala was for me. That is the single best thing that I learned on that trip, was love for all, no matter what their culture is, no matter what their creed is, it doesn't matter.
First of all, my name is Ryan Tahini. I went with Classy to India, or to Dharamsala in 2012. tour or the trip itself was something that has been fundamental my entire life. I'm pretty sure it shaped a lot of where I'm going and who I am today. I'm currently doing my master's in psychology, and I feel like a lot of it came from this trip. A lot of my decision to do that came from this trip. I always tell one story just because I think it's the hardest hitting in the shortest period of time, and was that really touched me. We were talking to a monk. He was telling us all about how he escaped China and how they put him in prison. And obviously I sat there and I was like in complete awe of this story. I mean, it's not something you ever hear. And obviously he ran the risk of dying when he was there. And so my first question was to him when he opened it up was, what was your greatest fear when you were, escaping, when you were running through the Himalayas? What was your greatest fear? And he looked at me and he said, my greatest fear was that I would lose my compassion towards the Chinese government. And it's still to this day something I'm not really sure I grasp. The fact that this man has so much compassion in his life that after everything he's been through, his greatest fear was that he would lose this, that he would lose his compassion that he felt towards the people who put him through everything that he'd gone through. And guys, that just shows you what kind of people you're dealing with, and honestly, just what kind of an experience you'll have up there. It's something that you can't get elsewhere. It's not something that exists here, and it's a really once in a lifetime opportunity. So, guys, once again, I can't recommend this trip enough.
Sorry, Anneke, it's a bit of a promotional thing there. If we question why is the Tibetans here? When Frankl traveled to the West after the war, the people were saying to him, this is the best things we've ever heard. This is amazing, because existential philosophy in this way was new. When he traveled to the East, they said to him, we've heard this before. So although the Buddhist philosophy is much deeper and richer than logotherapy, there are huge touch points between the two. So these journeys are to practice logotherapy practically, so to take people and to apply it in, like I said, in unusual environments, outside of the classroom or outside of a office or consultation room. So I think I'm going to stop now. I see it's 4:25. I hope that was okay. It felt like a bit of a runaway train. I hope it's okay.
Look, I know I'm not speaking for myself, but I could sit here for quite a lot longer. So that was really wonderful. Are you prepared to take some questions or have chats with?
I really want to tell you one more story, and it's not my story. I want to tell you it'll take me 2 minutes, and then we can this is about Ntokozo. Ntokozo was a cancer. She worked for the BHF. She survived breast cancer, and she was part of the program. And she came with us to base camp to become a brand ambassador for what is possible after surviving cancer, and to put a flag up for Sally Robinson, who's passed away, a couple of months before this trip. This was 2016. So Ntokozo, and also Ntokozo had survivor guilt. She had this feeling of guilt of, why did I survive? I'm working with people, they're dying, they're terrible conditions, but I'm spared. And this thing weighed on her. So now we go on the trek. Now the trek to base camp it's tough. So it's like 8 days up and 3 or 4 days down. Same route, up and down, 60 k's up and 60 k's down. So Ntokozo, by day 6, we realized she can't carry on. She had such tummy problems, and she was so weak, and she was in such a bad shape that she had to give up. So we got to this point, lunchtime, and it happens every trip. There are people we need to evacuate with helicopters. And this goes along with tears. There's always a lot of tears, because she's trained for 8 months. Now she's got to turn around. She's not going to make it. She's not going to get to base camp. On a chopper, off she goes. So I had a bit of a chat with her, but with her being so uncomfortable and the tears, I don't know, what news that was, but she off to Kathmandu. When we got back to Kathmandu 6 or 7 days later, she said to me, I want to tell you something. So yeah, she says, I almost died on that mountain, but I didn't die. So I got a second chance to life. And now I know that I have to stand up for the women who have passed on and who have gone before me. And how amazing is that not reaching her goal made her realize that there's a much bigger goal. Not going to base camp, that's not the point. That's just a tick mark and a photograph. The real goal is to stand defiantly for the people who have gone before. And this is the kind of results that one can get with the philosophy and the therapy of logotherapy.